Thanks, Mindy. And thanks, everyone, for attending tonight. Let me get my screen share going. And Mindy, if you can just confirm, can you see my screen showing? And
Yes, I can.
all right, awesome, thanks. Yeah, so the majority of tonight, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use Miro to be able to present the equivalent of slides. I'll be using Miro's frames. Let me go ahead and get into presentation mode. And yeah, I'll start with the backdrop for this, right? I mean, is DA too complicated? Is this what sometimes people can think about DA, because it does have a lot of content in it, a lot of guidance in it, and it does continue to grow. This is a question that comes up a lot, both in other types of live streams and webinars. It comes up in our public enrollment training. Comes up with customers that we either work with or hope to work with. And so first, I did want to start with a little bit of context for everyone. Just what is Discipline Agile? Well, one of the things that is a differentiator with DA is that it kind of refers to itself as a toolbox versus a framework. So frameworks are something that ties into the second kind of sticky note that I've got there, a prescriptive approach, right? If you're following a framework, it's typically an instance of process that you're going to follow. I mean, that's what frameworks are. DA is very different in that there isn't a single path, a single approach that you're going to be able to just kind of look at, grasp onto, and adopt. It's based on outcomes. It's based on goals. And therefore, it's very flexible. There's a lot of different ways that you can make selections to ensure your approach, your process is fit for purpose. The other thing is, it is a robust body of knowledge, right? There's a lot of guidance in it. That's a bit of a double-edged sword, though. I mean, that's partly why sometimes the perception of DA is that it can be very complicated. It can be very overwhelming. It can feel very heavyweight. And hopefully by the end of today, you'll have a little bit more insight into why it's perceived that way. And hopefully you'll draw the conclusion that it's not. So yeah, the toolbox metaphor. Right. So one of the things that I typically ask people is, so how big of a toolbox are you comfortable with? Right. And I'll say, just take a moment and I'll try and maybe paint a mental picture for everyone where, you have your car needs to be serviced, right? There's something wrong with it. You're not quite sure what's wrong with it. The check engine light is on, or you're just clearly recognizing something's not right with it. And you bring it in for service, right? Whether you bring it into a car dealership or a professional independent mechanic. And if you saw, right, you get a glimpse of the service area, and you see something like on the right, you see a really large toolbox. Would that make you uncomfortable? Would you think, oh my gosh, right? I'm not going to have this mechanic work on my car. Look at the size of the toolbox. What the heck are they going to do to it, right? Would you leave and maybe look for a mechanic that has a toolbox, maybe a toolkit, over here on the left, right? I mean, that looks like the first set of tools I got when I was quite young. I've since grown up maybe to this big, the big blue toolbox there, but I have a pretty sizable toolbox because I do enjoy working on cars. But yeah, I mean, would you want to have a toolbox this small? Well, I'll go back to the old joke that, when the only tool you have is a hammer, everything begins to look like a nail, right? So no, I mean, what I would personally feel comfortable with is I want to see a toolbox of that size, or I feel comfortable with a toolbox that size. Because I would think that, the person servicing my car, right, no matter what they find, they're going to more than likely have a tool that would be appropriate for that situation, for that particular context, right? They're not going to be trying to use another tool or make up a tool, possibly get the job done, but do a little damage along the way. No, I would want a sizable toolbox, or I feel comfortable with it. And so now I'm not going to be doing a lot of comparison between Discipline Agile and other popular approaches that that teams and organizations can use. But I am going to do a bit of a comparison with Scrum. Scrum's been around for, well, maybe the longest, right? It has celebrated its 25th year. Scrum is very well known. Scrum has done a lot of fantastic things for teams and organizations. But as a body of knowledge and an approach, it'll give us a little bit of an opportunity to compare a little bit of, Scrum versus DA from a guidance and body of knowledge perspective. So the question I often get sort of challenged with is, well, DA has all this stuff in it. Are you kidding me? We've got to do all of that? Well, no, that's by no means what Discipline Agile would support doing, nor would you get any value more than likely in doing that. So some of the discussions I'll have, and I mean, if you're a Scrum Master, you're a team level coach, or an enterprise level coach, you've got whatever, some amount of experience with Agile coaching, more than likely you're going to have familiarity with the Scrum Guide. So Scrum Guide, 13 pages long, right? So we saw in 2020 it was reduced, and there's a lot of comfort to having a very small body of knowledge, right? I mean, you can read the Scrum Guide pretty quickly, right? 13 pages. It's quite refined, right? The guide itself is pretty stable, so it's high quality, right? I mean, the things that are in it are written well, and it's a pretty easy read. But is it enough? 3 roles, right? Developers, product owner, and Scrum Master, right? And those 3 roles together form the Scrum team. 5 events, so the events in Scrum, the sprint planning, daily Scrum, sprint review, and sprint retrospective. And there's 3 artifacts: product backlog, sprint backlog, and increment. So a lot of the discussions that I have with trying to distill why Discipline Agile at least looks or appears or is perceived to be very complicated is kind of balancing it with the Scrum Guide. The other thing that I like to draw some attention to is that it probably isn't enough. And it recognizes that, right? Right in the very beginning of the Scrum Guide, right, where I've underlined, the Scrum framework is purposely incomplete, only defining the parts required to implement Scrum theory, right? So as a framework, as a prescriptive approach, it's got well-formed content in it. But there are things that you're going to potentially, or I would say, at least in my experience, almost always going to need in addition to this. Right? Now, one of the ways that you can keep a small body of knowledge and one that again is rather static, which rather mature, is that you don't have a lot in it that's going to cover every potential situation, right? Because as you're sort of now getting variations, right, supporting different contexts, you're going to need a certain amount of content, a certain amount of guidance to kind of pull that in. So one approach is this. It's, well, we're purposely incomplete. We've got some gaps that you're probably going to need to fill. The question then becomes, well, where are you going to get that from, right? Where are you going to go and find some of the things that might solve some of the challenges that you've had? Where are you going to find practices, techniques, strategies to improve the way that you're delivering the value that you're capable of delivering? Well, one way is you can go to your coach, right? If you've got a Scrum Master and you've got a team level Agile coach, and they do have some amount of experience and knowledge with respect to outside of Scrum, yeah, they're there to be able to coach you on that. Maybe you've got an Agile coach in your organization. Maybe you know somebody who's, an Agile coach, just meaning that, yep, they might know Scrum, right? A time box based approach. Maybe they know a little bit of a flow based, right? They know a lean type of approach using Kanban, maybe an intersection of the two, and so forth. So maybe what you're going to do is you're going to go to Google, right? And see, a lot of times, we hear, oh, well, DA's competitor is Scrum, or DA's competitor is a scaling framework like SAFe or large-scale Scrum or Nexus or some of these other ones, right? I personally feel that Discipline Agile's competitor is actually Google, because that's where you probably are going to also go to maybe look for, Agile practices or user stories or what's a definition of ready or what's Kanban, right? what's an iteration versus a sprint? Well, yeah, I mean, you go to something like Google and you can find a lot of information. I've got the blue arrow there. Sometimes I like to just hit, I'm feeling lucky and see where it takes me. Well, you can also go to books, right? You can, there's lots of great books on Agile and Agile practices. So books, you can, I don't know, use the, telephone, or Zoom or other methods, I guess, these days. But yeah, call a colleague. Hey, I know somebody who, was at a company that adopted Agile. I'll see what they did. Or, hey, I know somebody else in the organization, they've been using an Agile approach for a while. Let me check in with them. So we've got lots of potentially different places that you can find information, but it is somewhat disparate. And sometimes you got to kind of be able to filter through all of this. And then you're still maybe missing some of the information, which would be, well, if I pick this practice and I do this thing with my team, then, is it going to work with something else? Or are there some trade-offs or, positives and detriments as far as how we might make some of these selections in the things that we think we might get value from? You could use Discipline Agile. So what most people don't maybe have a good grasp of, because they're being introduced to Discipline Agile, in the current time frame, is I'll spend just a moment to give a little bit of context of how Discipline Agile has all of the guidance that's contained within it. So DA's got some content in it that's proprietary. It's stuff that's been written from the thought leaders and the intellectual property team that continues to maintain and evolve Discipline Agile. But Discipline Agile was originally a product that came out of IBM. So back in 2012, the first sort of version, which was Discipline Agile Delivery, and back then it was actually kind of referred, the body of knowledge was referred to as a framework. Well, it started off by really coming from the unified process. So IBM owned the Rational Software Company. It became their fifth brand back in like the early 2000s. So the Rational Unified Process had gotten to the point where it was, pretty mature and well used, maybe kind of got a little bit bloated in some areas. There was the Open Unified Process. So there was a lot of the intellectual property, kind of the core content of RUP was donated to the Eclipse Process Foundation. And a lot of contributing Agile thought leaders and Agile practitioners at the time were contributing to what was in EPF, and the Open Unified Process was one of those things. IBM had their Agile at Scale, and so that was brought in. And then something really interesting also was added in, all of the really great stuff that was in Scrum. Extreme programming, right? A lot of technical practices. Things that are from an Agile scale perspective, so a team of teams approach, like SAFe, the Scaled Agile Framework, DSDM, Kanban, Lean principles, Agile modeling, Agile data, the Lean startup, things from a DevOps perspective, things from NetObjective, which is now part of PMI and a really great value stream management content, let alone lots of other things. PMBOK, right, stuff that is in the project professional sort of space. So that's all within Discipline Agile. And that's one of the reasons why it is a sizable body of knowledge, right? But it has coverage. It has either something that is identical or very similar to everything that I've got on the screen that kind of forms its DNA. So hopefully, for those of you that maybe haven't heard or have a lot of experience with DA, maybe you're wondering like, hey, can you show me some of the content? Yeah, absolutely. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide my toolbox right onto the screen. Let's see if I can actually get it to cooperate. And I'm going to come out of presentation mode for just a moment and kind of put that overlay as close as I can right on top. So what I'm showing you is I'm showing you the Discipline Agile browser. So this is the primary source to find guidance within on Discipline Agile. So there is, I happen to have one of the books, right? The Choose Your Wild book. And you can see this is something you easily read sort of in a weekend, right? Sort of just over a Saturday afternoon. No, this is a reference book. The first 100 pages is what we would want to read. And the rest is guidance. It's the same stuff that, I'm gonna try and pull this up, get my camera to focus here. It's the same stuff that is now in the browser. As a matter of fact, the latest release of this book is only a little over 100 pages because the other 300 pages are in this tool. So this is the toolbox. So here's what's really unique about it is that we can find, if I were to go to, so that what I'm showing right now, this is called a process goal diagram. Let me start with that. So process goal diagram in the team level, discipline, agile delivery, there's 24 of these. Form team is one of them, and explore scope is another one. And as I'm clicking over here on the left, and the navigation, right, you can see that the graphic changed. So explore scope, right? I click on that, and it is a split screen, so I can see why is this important. And I know this is too small for everybody to read, but what I want to do is just give you a little context, a little information about all of the guidance that you can find in DA. So what I can do is I can say, oh, well, let's see, explore usage, and oh, now something's changed, right? So now I've got all of the options starting with design sprint and going down to user story map. So these are practices, techniques, or strategies that are known to work based on teams and organizations in all sorts of different type of product development delivery all across the world. So if I click on something like user story, it's going to highlight it. It's going to give me a brief description of what a story is, and then it's going to give me some trade-offs, right? So I can go through and look at quite a lot of different potential practices, right? Options that I could choose from so that I could form a way of working or enhance a current way of working that I've got. I could take a look at something like evolve way of working and look at something like select lifecycle. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to zoom in a bit here. And here is a great differentiator with DA. DA doesn't have a single lifecycle in it. Right? It doesn't have, so which Scrum does, right? And again, no disrespect to Scrum. Scrum has a construction kind of focus, and it is a time box based. I mean, it uses the name sprint, but it's an iteration. You're gonna do a small batch of work, 1 to 4 weeks in duration is what the Scrum guide tells us. With DA, yeah, we've got one of those. We have an agile life cycle, right? And I'm gonna just kind of pull this up, a Scrum-based project lifecycle that explicitly supports the full delivery lifecycle from beginning to end, and then we have some trade-offs. But you can see there's additional guidance and selections. We've got, citizen development, we've got continuous delivery between Agile and Lean. So continuous delivery using a time box, continuous delivery Lean using a flow or a Kanban style approach. Exploratory, Lean, large-scale Scrum next, and so forth, right? You can see there's a lot here. There's a lot here. That's a big part of the problem. So let me kind of get us back into the presentation mode here. And so that's one of the primary ways that you can get to information in DA. But it does look like a lot of content. I mean, I could have clicked through that, and it absolutely is. So maybe you're thinking, hey, that looked awesome. Or that looked awesome, but it definitely looked complicated, right? It might be no different than, right, this is a single book, but, I could have well, maybe showing my age, I could have a set of 24, 25, 26 encyclopedias, right? So a whole set of encyclopedias. Now, is that too much information? Is it too complicated? Am I going to try and read the encyclopedia starting with the first volume, going all the way down to the end, and then any additional sort of supplemental types of volumes that might be there? Well, I like to use this example, and this example actually comes from Al Shalloway. So Al Shalloway's a thought leader in the Agile and Lean space, and he likes to have lots of discussions around something that's complex, complicated, and how we describe that. And I would say a lot of times what people want is they want something simple because they feel like, oh, I can get my hands around it. It's easy for me to understand. And so, right, the comparison with the bike. So Unicycle is pretty simple. So I have a Unicycle and I've got an S-Works Tarmac. This is one of my favorite bikes. I have this model, and so I'm a pretty avid rider. And in comparing the two, so let's see the unicycle, it's got pedals, but it doesn't have any gears or brakes. There's no chain. It's got a seat and pedals and a wheel, essentially, right? The complicated bike, well, it's got 12 gears in the back. It's got 2 gears in the front, so 2, big chain ring, small chain ring. It's got front and rear brakes, and a fair amount of complicatedness, right? And when you're riding, you're able to change gears in the front, right? The small ring and big ring, and then you've got 12 gears in the back on this particular bike. So you have 24 gears, and you don't go like 1 through 12, and then you go 13 through 24. Depending on the situation, you're going to be changing back and forth between those front gears, and also possibly changing then again in the back, right? Depending on an incline or decline, or you're accelerating, whatever. But I would say, and again, I'm a pretty avid rider. I have tried to ride a unicycle, and those things are not very easy to ride. But almost anybody can ride a 2-wheel bike. So here's the thing. Here's how to less complicate this. I mean, I could, if I had somebody I was just sort of trying to teach how to ride a road bike like this, I could disconnect the front brake, because you could, on a front brake, you can hit your front brake lever pretty hard and possibly flip over. So rear brake, lot safer. Might not be the fastest way to stop, but it's going to be a lot easier to learn how to ride. I could disconnect the front derailleur. I could put it on the small gear, or the bigger chain ring, smaller chain ring, and just leave it set. I could shift the bike into, say, like 3rd gear, so something pretty easy still to get going, yet carry a little bit of speed. And that's it, right? So now I've given you a single speed bike with nothing more than a rear brake, although there's a lot of growth in this bike, right? So it's a good starting point. Now, with the unicycle, you're going to be kind of limited. Yeah, you can do different stuff with unicycles, but you're not going to see multiple gears and brakes and all sorts of other stuff unless maybe you're getting into like some sort of an extreme sports situation. But with this bike, right, we can grow with experience. We can use continuous improvement. You got some experience riding, your balance is good, you're pretty comfortable. Maybe I can connect the front brake back up, but kind of make it soft. Like I like my brakes really touchy because I have a light feel, so I like it really, really kind of tight. But yeah, for somebody else, I might be able to set it where, yeah, you're going to get some braking out of that, but you're not going to have to really, continue to be worried about, again, over braking in the front and flipping over. Maybe I keep the front derailleur disconnected, but have the rear one, and now you can start learning how to change gears, right? So yeah, this is a little more complicated than a single speed bike, but you have to go get another bike, right? I mean, all of this capability was there just waiting for you. So I'm back to the DA browser, right? So I'm back to the toolbox. And so form team, yep, here's a process goal. There's a whole bunch of decision points, things that teams might need to consider, and then making some selections. Go to, again, and DA's got phases in it, but now I'm looking at another process goal, right? Accelerate value delivery, right? Lots of great stuff here, right? Lots of great stuff, but still, a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff maybe we're not ready for yet. And then again, I had kind of clicked on this before, the evolved way of working. So the environment we're in, communication styles, collaboration styles, life cycle, and so forth, right? So we have lots of growth here, right? This is way beyond a 24-speed bike. Yeah. So here is the full view of Discipline Agile 5.5. That's the current release that's in the DA web browser. Over 1,500 options. So again, I personally, and what I try to convey is that just because we have this really large toolbox, we don't have to use all these tools. Again, just like going back into, to have a vehicle serviced. I'm not going to take 1,500 tools and dump it out on the floor for a team to say, yeah, use them all. No, of course not, right? But this is something that can appear to be very complicated, very heavyweight. It can be a turnoff, right? People can see this and say, oh my God, are you kidding me? Like, this is what you want us to adopt? You want us to use this? Like, that's why we use Scrum, and that's why we use whatever, right? That's a lot smaller. So what I would like to do is again, I like to try and like share some similar mental models or a mental picture that we can all kind of then use to move forward with. And so how do we decomplicate discipline agile, or is it even possible to do that? So let's use a common situation, right? So here's one, right? Relatively small team, 13 people. It's a team that's enhancing an existing product. So they're not doing innovation work with respect to something like a minimum viable product, right? Where again, we're exploring hypothesis, testing hypothesis, like can we productize something? Can we monetize it? This is, again, pretty common, right? We've got digital products and, we've got teams that enhance existing products. Waterfall, and I've got waterfall in quotes because sometimes, in some of the live stream discussions I've been a part of, I'll hear, well, there's really no such thing as real waterfall. It's never a complete handoff. So waterfall, predictive, traditional, hybrid, right, that's what this team would be doing, right? So some people might have a little knowledge, a little experience of what an agile way of working is. But for the most part, we're going to be moving away from that and into at least a agile way of working. Don't know really where to begin, and don't have an embedded coach nor sort of regular access to a coach. So again, maybe at the organization they've got like an agile COE or there's coaches around. We just don't have the level of support, the level of sort of interaction we might need. So what do we do? And I'm gonna flip back for a second. Do we just say we'll go here and explore this? Well, that is one strategy. I mean, you can have some amount of training. You can go and start taking a look using the web browser tool. But what I'm also going to say is that there are other strategies, and this is just one strategy, and this is one that the company that I work for, we've been helping organizations get the benefit of Discipline Agile since it was initially released. So we've got, just with DA now, about a decade's worth of experience. So now if I were coaching this team, right, what are some of the choices I would guide them to? I'd probably guide them, more than likely, maybe not always, but more than likely towards the Agile life cycle. So it's very similar to Scrum with some differences, but it's an iterative-based approach. And oftentimes it'll provide sort of like the guardrails. I don't want to say training wheels, but it's kind of what it is. It's like, well, let's have a defined time box that we can commit to doing some work, right? A small batch of work. And are we getting it done or not, right? Are we actually doing a real agile way of working? And I don't mean a platinum level of agile way of working. It's more like the tinfoil. Are we at least getting a lot of the benefits, like quick feedback, right? High level of collaboration that we should with an agile way of working. So this is a quick start. So we've got a number of these. So this is a relatively small team, and it's a team that's using a waterfall approach. It's a team that's supporting a product. It's a product that's already in existence, and we also have quick starts if you're in a similar situation, but now you're having to support multiple work items at the same time. So multiple projects. Sometimes that can also mean multiple products. So we have stuff for maintenance. We have stuff for teams that aren't doing IT type of work, right? Not software. People that are working in other areas of the organization, or even for physical product development. But for this quick start, this particular scenario, right? And I know that the process goal diagrams are way too small, but this is the equivalent of giving you a one-speed bike with just a rear brake, right? There are 67 options to choose from. And if I were to just kind of now compare, right, above and below, you can see it's not even all the process goals. Because if you're already supporting a product, right, there are things you're already doing. These 67, just like the other quantity of options that are in all the other quick starts, the other scenarios that we've got, are selected for very specific reasons, right? They're one of the things is that it's how do you move from your existing way of working to an agile or lean way of working, right? The agile life cycle or the lean life cycle in DA. Well, these are the things that definitely are going to need to change. I mean, if you're doing more of that big phase, like big requirements up front, and then you know the next big phase is development, and then then it gets handed off to testing, and then it gets handed off for UAT, right? So within respect to that, now you're saying, well, we're going to take an agile way of working, and we're going to identify like really small requirements, right? Stories, and as soon as we start implementing that story, I mean, within a day or within a few days, that story is going to be considered done, which means the development has been done, or if you're configuring a package application, there's going to be some level of QA that's been done. Then the role of the product owner is going to verify, right, validate that the acceptance criteria has been met, hopefully using a lot of the same testing assets. Well, I mean, to do that and to do that really early in your project lifecycle, your environment's got to be set up, your tooling and stuff has to be set up, access, test data, all things that you might have had months, if not many, many months to do. Now we need to do up front. So that's a lot of what we do with these quick starts, is we identify not only really high impact practices, but we identify the more significant things that are going to need to change. So on the left, this is the Explore Scope process goal with the 13 choices that are part of this quick start. The process goal on the right, the one that's got the little green circles around it, well, there's 56 options in the current version of DA, the 5.5 version. So we're not saying you can't use any of the other ones, but the ones on the left are a very good starting point. And these are the things that most teams, if they do these practices, are going to get benefit from. So if you do have some experience with DA, there's going to be a question, what about all the bolded options? Well, let me go back for a second. So on the right, the out-of-the-box, non-tailored version of this process goal, some of those options are bolded, like outcome and really, really round robin and epic and user story and so forth. Well, those are part of the guidance in DA for relatively small teams with relatively straightforward context, that those are really good choices to make. Great. The problem is that there's over 1,500 options that are in this toolkit at the team level, and there's over 400 of those bolds. That's a lot. I tell you, 400 is almost always, at least in my experience, going to be more than any team's going to need to do. Right? Again, those are really, it's a really good piece of information, but, and you can see on the left, they're all bolded just because these are all the recommended starting points for this quick start that we have. Now, on the left, right, the smaller process goal and the one that I'm gonna show sort of all the other ones on a single slide that are a little bit easier to read. Or single frame, sorry, I'm using Miro. There's a lot of ways to do this. So we've got PowerPoint, we've got Snagit, and we kind of sort of cobble these together, right? We're able to sort of take the things that we have as a good starting point based on a particular scenario, and we create a process goal out of it. You can do it in a spreadsheet. You can just take, the implementation is not really what's important. What's important is that we're not cognitively overloading people, right? We're not overwhelming them with so many choices and so much context. The other thing is that why these 67, right? For this particular scenario, right? The setup that I gave you. Well, for one, it's, we feel that they're high impact for any team. Again, something like using user stories or having acceptance criteria, creating a definition of done, having a definition of ready, right? Team norms, right? Team working agreements, all things that most teams are going to get benefit from. And a lot of them have a reciprocal relationship, right? So, I mean, if you're going to size your stories, it's really great to have examples of what those sizes are. You can use those samples also as showing this is the type of content that we need at this particular moment in time, right, in the life of a user story, so that we can create a definition of ready for us, right? So there's relationships with the ones that are most of the ones in the 67. And it's a pragmatic starting point. And I say that because, again, direct observation of hundreds of teams using DA over the last decade. And that's just not myself. I mean, we've got coaches that have, again, been enabling organizations and teams to use DA since it was first released. We've got a really good group of instructors and coaches. And so we've drawn upon all of that. But it's not just our experience and things we've observed. We're also fortunate because we've got lots of other consultancies that we have great relationships with, that we get an opportunity to talk to them and share information, right? What are the things that you've seen work in these types of situations? What are the things you've seen that haven't? Where maybe has somebody been overwhelmed? So we've distilled all of that into all of the varying quick starts that we have. The other thing is it only this D67? I wish I could have made that no to just completely engulf the entire screen, right? You may get value from less than 67, right? We're just trying to say 67 still might be too many. May not even be in a place to adopt all 67. And so one of the principles in DA is to be pragmatic. So we need to balance what can we actually adopt and be successful with? Measure that it's working for us, or maybe we need to look to a different option. We might get value from more than these 67. So we'll start here with teams. We'll kind of get a little bit of familiarity with them. We'll see if there's anything maybe we don't need, we're not going to get value from. Again, maybe it's going to overload us a little bit from an adoption perspective. And then from here, we'll go back to the full version of DA to say, have we missed anything? Right? Is there something else that maybe we're already doing, or something similar to what we're doing? Or, hey, this is a challenge that we've got, whether it's with this team or the culture of the organization or the interaction, communication with our stakeholders, people that we rely on from a shared services perspective. Then we can, again, kind of be moving from the single speed bike with just the rear brake, starting to add some things back in. The other thing that we can do is continue to evolve and grow. Right. So again, we've got a collection of practices and strategies and techniques, right? Those 1,500, that is a great place to look and also see the detriments, the trade-offs in selecting those, or situations they might not work so well, or if you're doing these practices, this might not be one that's going to work very well for you. So this is the quick start in its entirety for that scenario. And again, that scenario, the context of the particular type of team and situation is a little bit more than the green stickies that I had up there. But in looking at this, right, it's pretty quick to go through this with a team or with an organization. Form team, yep, it's an existing product team. It's pretty small. Stable, pretty long-lived team. Again, that can be somewhat matrix, but a lot of times in organizations, even if you've got employees and contractors, you might disband people if you're doing more of a project-based approach, and a lot of those people still come back together. Support the team, yep, coaching, mentoring, training. Again, we might not be in a situation where we have all of this, so this might be an area for some of these 67 we wouldn't be able to do. Vision strategy, right? How are we going to at least understand the larger scope of work? So this is intended for sort of project-based work, right? Something that's going to take more than a single story to implement. If we were doing continuous delivery lean, where we could, pull a story from our work items pool or our lean backlog, get it to the point where it meets our definition of done and release it, right? This is where it's something, new business capability, features, things that are going to take a bit of time, more than like a single iteration, a single time box to be able to get to completion and release. Explore scope, again, epic, persona, user story map, having a glossary, business rule, feature statements. So these are all things that oftentimes when I meet with other coaches, whether it's, somebody who's in a Scrum Master role or somebody who's in, just an Agile coach role, somebody who's, I'm an enterprise, Agile coach, somebody, who's got a lot of experience and working on strategy for an organization. And kind of challenge, are there any things here that it wouldn't be good for a team to do? Would it a glossary, having a common vocabulary? Now, I'm not saying we need a glossary that's as big as a DA book, right? I mean, it could be a glossary that's, one page or one small Confluence page, right? With just some of the things to make sure that we're all speaking the same language, right? So this is a really small subset of everything that is in the DA browser. And I'm going to come out of this for just a moment, and I'm going to pull the browser back over. So just kind of going back also to the develop test route, and click on something I haven't clicked on. And again, this is a split screen, so I'll just kind of shrink this just to get more on here. Now, develop test strategy, because obviously there's lots of different dimensions of testing. There's lots of testing types that we might potentially be doing. There's a lot of things in this particular process goal. So for those of you that might not be home mechanics, or maybe at some point, I don't know, somebody out there might have actually been a professional mechanic. What you do is, if you're a home-based mechanic, yeah, you're going to go to the hardware store, look on Amazon, go to go somewhere to buy your tools. If you're a professional mechanic, oftentimes the tool vendors, they have these really fabulous trucks that'll just show up at the work site, and you can go in them and pick all the tools that you're next going to put into your toolbox. So you don't even need to do that with DA. Now, this is a really big toolbox. This is like the big blue toolbox I started off with. This gets refreshed on a regular basis. So the tool supplier, I won't say vendor, the tool supplier regularly evolves the content here. So you don't even need to go and look for it. Things are being added in. Granted, I mean, there is a little, it's not really free, because there are more things you have to look through. There are more things as this continues to grow that people feel that it's complicated or it's overwhelming. But yeah, you're getting more tools put in your box all the time, and it's completely free, right? So it's one of the great things with DA. PMI has made the DA browser completely free for everyone, and I see in the Zoom chat, Pam posted that. Yeah, you click on that link, you're gonna get to a page, and I'm gonna go ahead and I'll go to, so if I go to DA browser, 5.5, right? So if I come back here, it's going to take me to this one. Now, if I click on the link, what it's going to do is it's going to take me to a landing page for DA resources. And I'm going to just kind of scroll down just a little bit here, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get to the browser. And we've got our most recent one, which is 5.5. We've got testable versions, right? So from a discipline agile certification perspective, they're here. Previous versions, the 4.0 version had been translated in multiple languages, and then kind of a release schedule. So look, this is when your toolbox is automatically going to get refreshed. You don't even have to do anything if you're using it. So with that, I'm going to stop my share, and let's see if there's any questions out there. Let's see what we've got in the chat. If you have any questions, please, I'm not seeing any in here, but put them in the chat. I don't know, come off mute.
That's what I was about ready to say, or feel free to unmute and ask your questions.
And I'll get it going. So I'll ask a question to all of you that are live in attendance. Was this different? Is this something that you hadn't seen DA before, and it does look really big, or you're interested in learning a little bit more about some of the quick starts that we have? Again, really plausible starting points. You're already using DA?
So I'll answer you, Joshua, and then I'll ask a question also. So
Okay.
I'm here to learn more about it. I do not know it well. So thank you very much for presenting and giving the overview and giving an example within there. Within the example of working with a team and trying to implement that, is there an aspect, does it get very much more complicated quickly if one works in a larger organization and having to apply some concepts of scaling with it when you've got lots of teams that are coming into play? And is that like a frowned upon approach to try to lead into that, where you would want to start with teams and then build teams and then kind of grow over time? Or if you were faced with the conundrum of a larger organization, does it open up all of the toolbox items, that there are many more variables that you're bringing into play, and that number goes up quite a bit.
Yeah. So, Brian, excellent question. So I have worked myself in a wide variety of organizations, organizations that have somewhere in the 100 or less people in IT to thousands of people spread all over the world. So there's two things that I that come to mind as you were leading in, as you were getting into the question is we've got agile at scale, which from a DA perspective just means that you've got more coverage in the organization. And that's both in sort of your IT teams as well as other areas, right? We've worked with another number of customers that have adopted an agile way of working in procurement, things like, creating new enterprise assets for like, how they're doing RFPs and how they're doing RFIs and how they're evaluating proposal criteria and so forth. So that's sort of agile at scale. Now there's also scaled agile, which is where your desire for new functionality is going to exceed what a single team is able to do. So now you're going to need to either have multiple teams that are just coordinating activities, dependencies. DA's got a lot of content for that. Or you're going to need to have some sort of a construct of a team of teams. And DA also has information for that. So there's a program lifecycle, which, the name program oftentimes you start thinking about like, a project of a bunch of projects. Well, program lifecycle in DA can be configured very similar to SAFe. It can be configured very similar to a lot of these scaled approaches. But there's also a lot of differences that you can take because, again, it's not a prescriptive approach. So those are two things. The other item that I want to mention is that when you are in a large organization, there are enterprise considerations that have to be attended to. So you do need to think about all of these options, and are there things that are specific from a regulatory compliance and governance perspective? So those are some of the things that might be in the 67 or the 82 or the 31 and these other scenarios we've got, or not, that we actually have to add in because it's very specific to an organization and it's something that's going to be either a benefit or it's just something there is a overarching reason why that needs to be attended to. In Discipline Agile, and Mindy, if you're okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen just one more time. I'm going to go back.
Yep, there you go.
Awesome, thanks. So what I'm going to do is let me just go back into...
You can continue to stare. You don't have to stop sharing your screen if you'd like.
Yeah, I was just trying to see if I could get more people that might have their camera on. So, Brian, one last thing, and for all of you as well. So I was focusing more on the team level approach, but you can see as I scroll down, we've got DevOps, we have Enterprise, and we have Value Stream. So when you're in a big organization, you're looking at your value creation structure, right? So how you're organizing people to get the value delivered as efficiently as possible. There's a lot of lean principles. There is a lot of content from Flow, which is by Don Reinerson. There are things in that are from the Theory of Constraints from Dr. Eli Goldratt. And a lot of what we can also focus on with Discipline Agile is sort of not just at the team level, but really how we're going to look at improving the flow of value delivery. And one last thing, because this can be a whole nother, actually this was part of the webinar I had done last time here with Expert Agile Club, is the value stream management approach is really looking not just within a value stream from an IT perspective, like the development value stream, and how people need to either be tightly banded or loosely banded together, or just a coordination of teams that are supporting multiple products, where there's enhancements that need to be done in 2 or more products for a customer to be able to consume that value. But also the supporting value stream, is legal need to be involved, or procurement, or HR, marketing, sales, like those types of things that have to happen. Like, hey, we've got a really great bit of functionality we're going to deliver. Yeah, if nobody knows about it because no marketing has been done, we might not be successful. And also the operational value stream, right? So how do we operationalize that value? Is there, and I don't just mean IT support of the the digital product. It's how are we supporting our customers in how they're getting value from purchasing or whatever it is that they're doing. So there's really solid strategies throughout Discipline Agile to be able to do all of that and more. And then there is also, if I were to go into the DA micro site within PMI.org, inside of the enterprise layer here, there's also transformation guidance. So there's guidance that just hasn't made it into the web browser yet. But this goes well beyond just a single team or just how we'd organize like a core team or a cross-functional team or a component team or a feature team, to really being able to see, again, how we're able to make improvements and deliver things more efficiently.
Great. Thank you for laying that out.
Sure.
We do have 2 questions in the chat, folks.
Great. Okay, so what does the bolded words and the up and down arrows in the DA browser mean? Yeah, great. Excellent question. So here's how you read, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to just shrink this down a little bit, and just to make sure everybody can see this, I'm going to just kind of zoom in a little bit here. So if you're looking at like size of team, so DA recognizes that a small team is going to, in most situations, be more beneficial than a really large single team. So the bolds are intended to be for small teams. That's why small team is bolded, with a relatively straightforward context. It's a good starting point. Sometimes it's going to be at the top of the list, sometimes not, like focus solution team is here. So the arrow is indicating an ordered list. It means that you might not be able to start with the bold. You might start, for instance, with a single team and then be able to move up if it was an ordered list. If it's not, it's typically going to be alphabetical. Not always, but most of the time if there's not an arrow. And I'm going to maybe click on Explore Scope for a second and take a look at something like Apply Modeling Strategies. Or no, how about Choose a Backlog Management Strategy? So the very bottom is none. Right? You might not have anything now. And then maybe an unsequenced backlog. And then the requirements backlog, product backlog, is meant to show just something that would be product backlog items. The agile backlog means we've got something like user stories and technical stories on it. And a lean backlog, this used to be called a work items pool. It means that you're able to take a look at that backlog and have different things that you're considering, like expedited work or work that has other types of attributes associated with it. So bolds, really good starting points for small teams and straightforward situations. If there's an arrow, it just means that as you get more towards the top of these options, they might be a little more advanced. You might need a little more experience, be more mature. But if you're getting to where you're getting a lot of these options in use, you're going to be probably functioning as a pretty high performing, agile or lean team. The other thing is there's a lot of things in the toolbox. Is there some sort of a decision framework to narrow down the choices? So there are lots of ways that I've seen this done. Again, what we've got with our Quickstarts is a way to narrow down these choices based on almost like, personas for a particular type of team and a particular type of context. I've seen other coaches have all the stuff in spreadsheets, and so they have some ways that they can kind of manipulate that. Again, I've seen where we've got another instance where we've got all of the process goal diagrams and a Miro board, and we've just got sort of white boxes that are hiding a bunch of stuff, and then we just kind of pull. It's like pulling back the covers a little bit. So there are lots of ways to do this. They're not necessarily found in DA, though. You're going to find that more from coaches and consulting companies that have a lot of experience with this.
Hey, this is James, just to expand on that. So what I'm hearing is that if you're getting into DA, you're gonna need a wayfinder, as it were, to get you in. I'm just trying to figure out how much DA is DIY, and how much do you need to bring a guide with you?
Yeah.
So just connecting to this.
Yeah. So James, so I'll start off with the most ideal situation. The most ideal situation is you've got an agile coach that has a lot of experience with DA. I mean, it's not going to get much better than that. The next thing down is if you've just got a coach with agile experience, right? Because they probably know a lot of what's in DA. So they don't have to really necessarily have experience with DA, but they'll probably gain some experience by just navigating through the content. The next thing you might do is start with somebody's quick start, right? Again, like some of the ones we have. Another way is you just like realize that there's a lot of content and you start going through and using the guidance in DA, which plenty of teams have done, right? Some of what I was trying to discuss tonight was that it can be overwhelming and there's ways to overcome that. But we've had lots of people that have come through our public enrollment, like open enrollment training, that just learn about DA. They learn about all these process goals. They learn about some of the other guidance that is outside of the process goals in DA. And then you gotta invest some time. You gotta go through and take a look at, if I take a look at explore scope and I'm gonna see some of these options. Okay, then I'm gonna go down to maybe something like address changing stakeholder needs. So you can do it on your own, and there's plenty of teams that have done that. I've been at organizations that had minimal support. But if you've got the Wayfinder, if you've got the opportunity to get a guide to help you, it's going to be an accelerator. And the one last thing I'll say about that is it's also good. Like we, in our Quickstarts and the ways that we approach this, we don't remove all the decision making, right? I mean, people still have to think, right? That's a big part of what we try and instill in the team members and the teams and the organizations that we get an opportunity to work with that. You know, it's not here's your one scenario. It's you're going to start with this, but we should be seeing some improvement as quickly as possible. And the guided continuous part of DA is all the guidance that's there. Again, what's unique is get a brief description. You see how, again, the trade-offs and how it interacts with other practices. And that is pretty different in the, just, I guess, out in the marketplace as far as having something that's freely available.
Okay, thanks. I'll share with you my persona as maybe a scenario. So coming at this with more of an adaptive mindset, with more of a heavy predictive background. So in healthcare, so we wind up acquiring solutions and to solve a problem. But let's just say that perhaps all the in healthcare, there's a lot of complexity in terms of roles, expectations, et cetera, not unlike many industries, I guess. So the vendor may arrive with a plan they think is good for turning on their solution. Obviously, we want to come up with a way to build a holistic plan that makes sure that we know what we're looking to solve, identify the outcomes, which typically a service line leader may not find or define, when they're just looking to buy something, and make sure we can retrofit or enhance a standard vendor supplied plan and actually turn it into something meaningful for solving our problems and making sure we have adoption on the end of this. So just looking to see to what extent people have been using DA or, shopping from the different sections of DA, or, across the life cycle of a particular project. Again, you can tell my adaptive mindset to solve that problem. Any thoughts?
Yeah, so I have spent some time in the healthcare industry, as well as others that have sort of a similar situation where, you're describing you've got vendors and you've got to try and get something to fit. So if you're using one approach, right, one agile way of working, and your vendor's using a different approach, right, oftentimes you're not using the exact same approach. Right. And you can have, in some organizations, you can have a mindset of just, again, a very prescriptive, very like, this is what we're doing. See, the great thing about DA is it allows also some compromises. So in the situation that you're describing, what you could do is you could say, look, we have a flexible approach, right? We're looking at specific outcomes that we're driving towards, but we also have a certain risk tolerance, right? So we want to make sure that we've got some controls over what we're doing. So you're able to go to this toolbox, and you're able to at least start opening a different type of discussion up to make some agreements, maybe a little compromises on both sides, so that you're using, again, practices or strategies that are going to meet your needs without being just relentlessly uncompromising, which oftentimes that just doesn't work that well. So it does provide, again, a lot of flexibility and a lot of discussions that can result from that.
All right, thanks. I'll just walk with my impression. I feel like DA is walking into a Home Depot and we're just trying to figure out what to put in our toolbox, which again could be quite full. And then I'm really thinking about when I'm looking at projects, what's my top shelf in the toolbox? So I'm trying to still distill this further. There's a lot of choices.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. As you're filling up your cart, whether it's a rolling shopping cart, which is pretty big at Home Depot, or like one of those really big carts that you're getting the heavy stuff on. And you're figuring that out, and that is, I mean, if you're going into Home Depot, you're able to more than likely get what you feel is going to benefit you. It might not, right? You might have to go back to Home Depot. I often have to go back to Home Depot more than once because not everything works out exactly right. But at least I can go back. Versus, you're just going to your grocery store, and the hardware section is one really little tiny area that's in one of the aisles, right? I mean, you're really limited there. Versus you're going back to Home Depot.
We do have oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh,
I was just going to say thanks.
Okay.
oh, sure. Yeah.
We do have another another question, sorry, in the chat box.
It seems that DA allows for teams to self-organize and decide on their practices rather than rely on a person to be directive about their approach. Yeah, I mean, that's the intent with DA, right? It's all about choosing your way of working. And I still have the book here, so I'll just hold it up, right? It's all about, let's try to get the camera to focus, right? Choose your way of working. Again, being in if you're in a company of any size, there are some things we're going to have to attend to. One of the 8 principles of DA is enterprise awareness, right? But that is what we want to see teams do. I mean, that's all about self-organization. The people doing that work should be in the best position, and they should be empowered to make a decision on how to get that work done, right? And a lot of that comes from the lean principles, right? So we want to trust that the people that are doing the work are doing their best to get it done. They have the right level of skills and experience. And again, we want to see that management is providing the system, the environment they're working in, removing impediments, making work flow better, and letting teams choose the things that are going to work for them. And I give one example of that, sizing of work items, right? And I'll just say sizing of stories, right? User stories or technical stories. DA has a lot of different options for that. Everything from no sizing, it's an option, what I wouldn't recommend, but we can see popular methods like team sizing, right? Sometimes called affinity sizing. We see planning poker, right? We see wideband Delphi. We see educated guess by a team member, educated guess by an entire team. There's a whole number, similar sized items. There's a whole number of choices. We might see where a team is going to start with one of those techniques and then evolve to move to another one, right? We might see they're going to use one of those techniques early in the project timeline, like whole team sizing, where you've got a lot of stories potentially that you're going to size very quickly. And then you're going to refine that with another technique as you're getting closer to pulling that work into your workflow, right? So if you're using Agile Lifecycle, again, it's like Scrum, you've got iteration planning, similar to sprint planning. Yeah, you're getting ready to pull that work. It should meet the definition of ready. Hopefully you got one of those. And so we might use something during like whole team backlog refinement, or another technique we've got in DA called look ahead planning, to be able to use a different sizing technique that's going to increase the accuracy and the precision of those estimates while still being something very quick. So yes, it's all about empowering teams to be able to choose their way of working.